Leland Graves found the letter before he found the woman. It was tucked beneath the front step of his fishing cabin on the shore of Crooked Lake, pressed flat under a river stone, as if someone had placed it there with great care and very little time. Outside Kenora, Ontario, in the last week of October, the mornings had already turned the color of iron, and the birch trees had shed everything they had left to give. Leland had not expected company. He had not expected much of anything since Patricia died. He set down his axe and picked up the envelope. No name on it, no return address, only a single dark smear across one corner that he did not immediately recognize as blood. Inside was one folded page. The handwriting was cramped and slanting, as if written in a moving vehicle or by someone whose hands would not stop shaking. If something happens to me, look for what Aldous Crane keeps in the locked room behind the feed store. He knows what he did to the Pemberton women. He knows I know. My name is Cecily Prout, and I am not a liar, and I am not what he says I am. Leland read it twice. Then he walked down to the lake, where the mist still sat low on the water, and he stood there for a long time. He had driven out to Crooked Lake 3 weeks ago with 2 boxes of food, a crate of books, and no intention of speaking to another human being until spring. He had been a constable in Kenora for 19 years. He had seen enough. After Patricia's death, his sergeant had suggested leave. Leland had not argued. He had packed the truck the same afternoon. Now someone had left him a letter soaked in blood. He thought about putting it back under the stone. He was not a constable anymore, not really. His badge was in a drawer back in town. He was a 51-year-old man with sore knees and a grief he had not yet found the bottom of. He folded the letter and put it in his coat pocket. That was when he heard the sound from the woodshed. It was not an animal. He had heard enough animals in the night to know the difference. This was something slower, something deliberate. Someone trying very hard not to make noise, and failing just barely. Leland crossed the yard without hurrying. He had learned long ago that hurrying changed things, and not always for the better. He pulled open the woodshed door. A woman sat wedged between the back wall and a stack of birch cordwood, her knees pulled to her chest, her dark coat torn at the shoulder. She was perhaps 30 years old, maybe a year or 2 younger. Her face was lean and sharp-boned, and her left eye was swollen nearly shut. She had a cut above her eyebrow that had stopped bleeding only recently, and her hands, he noticed, were clenched in her lap with a particular tension. The kind that comes not from cold, but from the effort of holding yourself still when every instinct is telling you to run. She looked at him the way a person looks at someone they have already decided cannot be trusted. "I'm not going back," she said. Her voice was flat and certain. Leland looked at her for a moment. "Back where?" She did not answer. "I'm not asking you to go anywhere," he said. "I'm asking if you need a doctor. I need you to leave me alone." Leland considered this. Then he said, "It's below 0 and you're bleeding." He stepped back from the door. "There's a stove inside. You don't have to talk to me." He walked to the cabin and left the door open behind him. He put a kettle on. He did not look out the window. It was another thing he had learned. Some people could only make a choice if no one was watching. 4 minutes passed. Then he heard her footsteps on the porch. She came inside and stopped just past the doorway, keeping the distance between them that she needed. He set a mug of tea on the far end of the table and went back to the stove. He did not say anything. Neither did she. After a while, she sat down and wrapped both hands around the mug. "I found your letter," Leland said. Her eyes came up fast. "Under the front step," he said. "The stone must have shifted." He set the envelope on the table between them. She looked at it, then at him. "My name is Leland Graves," he said. "I used to be with the OPP out of Kenora. I'm not, right now. I'm just a man with a cabin." She studied him for a long time. The swollen eye made it hard to read her expression, but he got the sense she was doing the same thing he had spent 19 years learning to do, deciding whether someone was what they appeared to be. "Cecily Prout," she said at last. "Just the name, nothing else." "I know," he said. She looked at the envelope again. Then you know what I said in there. I do. And Leland poured himself a tea. And I think a woman who went to the trouble of writing that down and leaving it somewhere safe probably had a reason. Cecily looked at the fire. Outside, the wind moved through the birch trees with a sound like water. She sat very still, and Leland had the sense that stillness was something she had practiced for a long time. He'll say I'm unstable, she said. He's already said it. Half the town believes him. Which half? Something shifted in her face. It was not quite a smile. The half that does business with him. Leland set down his mug. Tell me what he did. She looked up at him again, and this time the wariness in her face was mixed with something else, something that looked, cautiously, like surprise. As though no one had said those words to her before and meant them plainly. People have been asking me what I did, she said. I'm not people, Leland said, and I'm not asking what you did. Cecily was quiet for a moment. Then she began to speak. Her mother, Bet Prout, had worked as a bookkeeper for Aldous Crane's feed and supply operation out of Rainy River for 11 years. Crane was the sort of man who sat on charitable committees and sponsored the hockey teams, Winside, and was photographed every November dropping the first coin into the Legion's collection box. He had a handshake that went on a beat too long, and a way of looking at women that his friends called charm, and that the women themselves recognized as something colder. Bet had kept his books and kept her head down and never said a word, because she had 2 daughters at home and a mortgage that did not care about her feelings. But there were other women. Seasonal workers, mostly. Women who came through town for the harvest contracts. Women who needed the reference letters Crane was known to provide. Women who had no one in Rainy River who would speak for them if something went wrong. And things went wrong. They went wrong with a particular pattern that Bet had watched for years. From the quiet of her office, writing numbers into columns while women came and went. And some of them left with their faces, arranged the careful way that faces arrange themselves when something has happened that cannot be said. 3 years ago, one of those women, a young Métis woman named Violet, had not just left quietly. She had gone to the RCMP detachment in Rainy River and given a statement. The statement went nowhere. Crane was not charged. The file was closed within 6 weeks. Violet left town. Bet, who had been the one to drive Violet to the detachment, was called into Crane's office 2 days later and told that her position was being restructured. He fired her on a Tuesday. By Thursday, it was around town that Bet Prout had been let go for falsifying accounts. Bet had not falsified anything, but she was 62 years old and lived alone and had a bad heart, and fighting a man like Aldous Crane took a kind of energy she no longer had. She had not told Cecily any of this at the time. Cecily had been living in Thunder Bay, working as a dental assistant, building something small and steady for herself. Bet had not wanted to worry her. Then, 8 months ago, Bet died. A cardiac event, the doctor said, quietly in her own bed. Cecily came home to settle the estate and found her mother's apartment nearly empty, except for a cardboard box under the bed, sealed with packing tape and labeled, in Bet's handwriting, for Cecily, open only if something happens to me. Inside the box was a journal, 6 years of careful entries. Names, dates, descriptions. Not accusations. Bet had been too careful for accusations, but observations, patterns, questions that a woman who kept books for a living had noticed and recorded and never had the chance to bring forward. And tucked into the back cover of the journal was a folded copy of Violet's original statement, the one the RCMP had received and quietly shelved. Bet had not known how she'd obtained it. It was there. Oh, Cecily had sat on her mother's kitchen floor for a very long time. Then she had made a mistake. Or what Crane would later call a mistake. She had gone to Aldous Crane directly. I wanted to look him in the face, she told Leland. Her voice had not changed, but her hands tightened around the mug. I wanted him to know that someone had kept a record, that my mother had kept a record. What did he say? He said my mother was a sad woman who had invented stories to cope with being fired for incompetence. Cecily's jaw tightened. Then he picked up the phone and called someone. I don't know who. And before I got back to my car, I had 2 of his men following me. That had been 4 months ago. Since then, Cecily had tried twice to bring the journal to the RCMP detachment in Rainy River. The first time, the officer at the desk had taken down her information and told her someone would be in touch. No one had been in touch. The second time, she had asked to speak to the commanding officer. She had been told he was unavailable. She had waited 2 hours. He remained unavailable. Meanwhile, stories had begun to move around Rainy River. That Cecily Prout was unstable. That she had a history of making false claims against employers. That she was harassing a respected member of the community out of spite over her mother's dismissal. She had no family left in Rainy River. Her mother had been her person, the one who would have believed her without needing reasons. The friends she still had in Thunder Bay believed her, but they were 6 hours away, and the phone calls cost them both something she could not name. Last week, she had found her car tires slashed outside the motel where she was staying. The night after that, someone had pushed a note under her door. Go home. There is no home for you here. She had driven north and east, not sure where she was going. She had pulled off the highway near Kenora because her hands were shaking on the wheel. She had found the dirt road to Crooked Lake because it was unmarked and unlit, and no one would think to follow her down it. She had written the letter under the dome light of her car before she let herself sleep. Leland listened to all of it without interrupting. This was not a skill everyone appreciated. Some people needed questions to feel heard. Cecily was not one of them. She needed a witness, and the difference was something he understood. When she finished, the cabin was quiet except for the fire. The journal, he said. Where is it? She reached into her coat and drew out a slim, cloth-covered book, worn at the corners. She set it on the table. I've read it so many times I could recite it, she said. But the original matters, handwriting. Her handwriting. Leland looked at it. He did not reach for it. And Violet's statement, tucked in the back cover. Still. He leaned forward. Can I ask you something? She nodded. The locked room he keeps. You mentioned it in the letter. What do you know about it? Cecily's expression changed. It became careful and still in a new way. The way of someone deciding how much to spend. My mother wrote about it. Crane has a back room at the feed store that no one enters but him. She never saw inside it, but she heard 2 of his men talking once about records he kept there. Not business records. She paused. About the women. Land sat back. Outside, the lake had gone the color of old pewter under the cloud cover. He thought about Violet, who had given her statement to the RCMP and then left a town that had not protected her. He thought about Bet Prout, who had kept 6 years of careful notes under her bed and died without anyone reading them. He thought about the kind of quiet that settles over a community when enough people decide that peace is more valuable than truth. You should rest, he said. Take the bed in the back. I'll sleep out here. Cecily looked at him. I don't need to be taken care of. I know, he said. I'm offering a bed, not a protector. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she said, What are you going to do? Leland looked at the journal on the table between them. I'm going to make some phone calls, he said, to people who are not in Rainy River. She did not thank him. He did not expect her to. She picked up the journal, tucked it back inside her coat, and went to the back room. Leland sat at the table for a long time after, listening to the wind come in off the lake. In the morning, he found Cecily already awake, sitting at the table with the journal open in front of her and a pen in her hand. She was making a separate clean list on a piece of his notepaper. Every name her mother had recorded, every date, arranged in a simple grid. Her handwriting was neat and deliberate. You don't need to, he began. You don't need to. I know what I need to do, she said, without looking up. He made eggs. He did not say anything more about it. Later, she noticed the photograph on the shelf above the window. A woman with light eyes and a wide, unhurried smile standing in front of a canoe on what looked like the same lake, summer light behind her. Your wife? Cecily asked. Leland looked at the photograph. Patricia, he said. She died 2 years ago, January. Cecily set down her pen. I'm sorry, he nodded. What was she like? It was not the question he usually got. Usually people asked how, or they asked how he was managing, or they said something kind and vague and moved on. He stood at the window for a moment, looking out at the gray water. She had a way of knowing when someone was lying, he said finally. Not from evidence, just from something she felt. I used to tease her about it. I spent 20 years learning to read people professionally, and she could do it better by instinct in the first 30 seconds. He stopped. Cecily was looking at him quietly. She would have believed you, he said, before you said a word. Cecily turned back to her list. When she spoke again, her voice was level and careful. My mother was the same way. They did not say anything after that for a while, but the silence between them had changed into something more like shared ground than distance. It was Cecily who solved the problem of the locked room, and she did it the way she solved most things, methodically and without announcing herself first. She had not told Leland everything the night before. She had not told him about the copy she had made of Crane's delivery schedule, the one she had found among her mother's papers. Bet had kept it because it showed the dates when Crane's back room received deliveries outside of normal business hours. Deliveries logged to a holding company that did not appear in any public registry Cecily had been able to find. The most recent date on the schedule was 2 weeks away. If someone was at the feed store on that date, Cecily said, setting the schedule on the table beside the journal, at the right time, they might see who comes and what they bring. Leland looked at the paper. That's not a plan, he said. That's a starting point. I know the difference, she said. He studied her. You've been planning this longer than one night in a woodshed. She did not answer immediately. Then, I didn't drive to Crooked Lake by accident. Leland sat back. You knew I was here. I knew an OPP constable had taken a leave of absence and gone out to a cabin near Kenora. I didn't know if you were the kind of man who would answer a letter. She looked at him directly. I left it under the stone and waited to see. Something in him shifted. He had thought he was the one deciding whether to help her. She had been deciding whether he was worth approaching. And, he said, you left the woodshed door open, she said. And you didn't ask about the blood. Leland was quiet. Then he said, who gave you Crane's delivery schedule? A woman named Pearl, who worked the counter at the feed store for 12 years and quit last spring. Cecily's voice softened slightly on the name, the first time her voice had softened on anything. Pearl lives in Dryden now. She can't come back to Rainy River. She's afraid of what happens if she does, but she still has things she saved. A pause. She's not the only one. How many? Cecily looked at the list she had been building from her mother's journal. 7 women who will speak, 2 who might, 3 who I have not been able to reach. Lynn stared at her. You've been building a case. Someone had to, she said simply. It was not bravado. It was a factual statement, offered without heat, and it landed somewhere deep in his chest. He thought about Violet, who had gone to the RCMP and gotten nothing. He thought about Pearl living in Dryden with her proof and her fear. He thought about 7 women willing to speak and what it had cost them to get willing. And he thought about a system that called itself a protection and had protected nothing. The OPP has a serious crimes unit out of Thunder Bay, he said. My sergeant knows the inspector there. More importantly, the inspector is not from Rainy River and doesn't owe Crane anything. Cecily nodded slowly. Would your sergeant listen? I think, Leland said carefully, that if the right person called him and said the right things, and if that call happened to be accompanied by a journal in a woman's handwriting covering 6 years and a signed statement from a witness to an unreported incident, then yes, he might listen very carefully. Cecily looked at him for a long moment. I need it to go somewhere real, not another file that gets closed in 6 weeks. I know, he said. That's why we're going to do this a particular way. He poured more tea. Then he sat down across from her and they began, together, to figure out what the particular way would be. For the next 3 days, the cabin at Crooked Lake became something Leland had not expected it to become, a working room. Cecily spread her mother's notes across the table. Leland spread his own, the careful muscle memory of a man trained to build cases from fragments. She knew the story. He knew the structure. Between them, they had something that neither had alone. They worked in the mornings and talked in the evenings, sometimes about Crane, sometimes about other things. He told her about a case he had worked in his first year that had gone badly, not because of bad police work, but because no one had thought to ask the right question at the right time. She told him about a summer she had spent in Quebec City the year after her dental training, and how she had learned, for the first time in her life, what it felt like to be somewhere that did not already know her mother's history with her. One evening she noticed the woodpile beside the stove was getting low. She looked at it, then at Leland, then went out the back door. He heard the axe come down once, twice, 5 times, steady and even. She came back with an armload of split birch and stacked it without comment. "You didn't need to," he started. She looked at him with one eyebrow raised. He stopped. "Good," she said, and went back to her notes. On the 3rd night, she asked him something he had not expected. "Do you think it matters?" she said. Her voice was quiet and not quite steady for the first time. "What my mother wrote. I've been carrying it for 8 months. I've driven it to 2 detachments. I've been called unstable and spiteful and worse. And some nights I lie awake and think." She paused. "I think, what if it simply doesn't matter? What if the right people protect themselves so well that nothing ever reaches them?" Leland did not answer immediately. He looked at the journal on the table, at the 6 years of careful, quiet record-keeping, a woman writing alone in her office, watching what happened and writing it down, not because anyone asked her to, not because anyone would protect her for doing it, but because she understood that the only thing worse than injustice is injustice that goes unnamed. "Bet kept those notes for 6 years, he said. "She kept them when she had no reason to think anyone would ever read them. She kept them for a woman she barely knew who came to her with nowhere to go." He looked up at Cecily. "That matters, whether it reaches the right people or not. But I think it will." Cecily looked at the journal for a long time. When she looked up, her eyes were bright and controlled. "You sound sure." "I'm not sure," he said. "But I think there's a difference between what's likely and what's possible, and I stopped letting likely be the limit a long time ago." She was quiet. Then, "Patricia," she said. He looked at her. "When she died, did you know how to go on? I mean, right away. Did you know?" He shook his head. "I didn't know anything right away. I went through the motions for about 6 months, and then I drove out here and sat in the woodshed for a while." The corner of her mouth moved. "The woodshed. It's a good woodshed," he said. She almost laughed. It was a sound like something coming unfrozen at the edges, careful and real. "Your mother didn't go through the motions," he said. "She did something harder. She paid attention when it would have been easier not to." He looked at Cecily. "You're the same way. You drove to 2 detachments, instead of leaving it under a rock somewhere. Most people would have left it under a rock." Cecily picked up her pen. Then she set it down again. "She would have liked you," she said. "She had no patience for people who talked around things." "I'll take that," he said. They called his sergeant the following morning. The conversation was careful and specific, and Leland did not use the word favor because favors could be declined, and what he was offering was not a favor. He told his sergeant that he had a documented case, multiple named witnesses, a 6-year contemporaneous record, and a filed witness statement that had been prematurely closed in Rainy River. He said the words Serious Crimes Unit and Independent Review, and he said them in the order that made them impossible to set aside. His sergeant was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Send me what you have. The inspector's name is Fournier." Leland relayed this to Cecily. She was already making copies. Inspector Fournier was from Sudbury. She had been with the OPP for 23 years, and had the particular quality of someone who had outlasted every person who had underestimated her. She called Cecily directly the evening after receiving the documents. The conversation lasted 40 minutes. Leland sat at the other end of the cabin and did not listen. When Cecily came out, her face was different, not relieved, not triumphant, quieter, like a string that had been held taut for months and had finally been allowed to release just slightly, not fully but enough to breathe. "She's opening a file," Cecily said. "A real one. Thunder Bay, Fournier's unit." Leland nodded. "She wants Pearl," Cecily said. "And the others. Can you get them?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. Then she sat down and put her hands flat on the table and took a slow breath. "One more thing," Cecily said. "She wants the locked room. She says whatever is in there is the piece that makes everything else stick." Leland looked at the delivery schedule on the table. "The date is in 5 days," he said. Cecily met his eyes. "I know. It's not something we should do alone," he said. "I know that too. Fournier's people would need to be there." "Yes." Cecily paused, "But someone who knows the town should be there as well. Someone who knows what he looks like when he lies, and what he says when he's cornered." She held his gaze. "He'll deny everything the moment he sees a badge. He'll lawyer up in 60 seconds and claim the room is private property. He'd be right about the property, unless there's probable cause." Cecily reached into her coat and laid a second document on the table, one Leland had not seen before. It was a statutory declaration signed by Pearl describing in specific detail the contents of the locked room as she had once glimpsed them through an open door. Boxes of files, a ledger. Photographs. Leland stared at it. "Pearl signed this 3 weeks ago," Cecily said. "I've been waiting for the right moment to use it." He looked up at her. She looked back. There was no triumph in her face. Only the calm of someone who has been building something for a very long time and has finally found the last piece. "You've thought of everything," he said. "No," she said. "I've thought of what my mother thought of. I just finished it." The day before the delivery, Leland called his sergeant again. That afternoon, Inspector Fournier called him directly. The conversation was brief and very specific, and it ended with her saying, "I've issued the warrant. My team will be on the ground by 7. You stay visible and stay out of the way." Leland told Cecily. She sat with that for a moment. "Out of the way," she said. Those were her words. "What do you think?" He looked at her. "I think Fournier is right, and I think you've earned the right to be there when it happens, and I think those two things can both be true." Cecily nodded. "You should call Pearl tonight," he said, "and the others if they're ready." She was already reaching for her phone. On the morning of the delivery, 5 OPP vehicles arrived in Rainy River before the feed store opened. Crane was inside when they entered. Pearl arrived at 10 o'clock, drove from Dryden alone, and walked through the front door with her head up. 2 of the 7 women Cecily had spoken to came with her. 3 more gave their names over the phone. A 4th sent a written statement through a lawyer. The locked room held what Pearl's declaration had described. Files going back 11 years. A ledger with names and dates and amounts, not unlike Bet Prout's journal, except that this one had been written by Crane himself with his own hand, in the habit of a man who had never imagined anyone getting through the door. Aldous Crane was taken out of his own store in handcuffs at 20 past 11. Leland stood on the opposite side of the street and watched. He was not in uniform. He had no badge. He was just a man from Kenora watching something happen that was a long time coming. Cecily stood beside him. She watched without speaking. He did not say anything either, because there was nothing to say that the moment did not already contain. "When Crane's vehicle had gone," she said, "my mother kept those notes for 6 years and never knew if anyone would read them." "She knew," Leland said. Cecily looked at him. "She put them in a box for you," he said. "She knew." Cecily closed her eyes for a moment. Then she opened them, and the October air came in, off Lake of the Woods cold and clean, and the trees along the main street of Rainy River had gone the color of rust and amber and old copper, the way northern Ontario goes in the fall before it gives everything over to winter. She leaned her shoulder against his arm briefly, just that. It was enough. 3 weeks later, Inspector Fournier called to say the charges had been formally laid, and 3 additional complainants had come forward since the story moved through the news. She also said Pearl had agreed to give a full interview to the Crown. The call lasted 4 minutes. When Cecily came off the phone, she was standing in the kitchen of the cabin at Crooked Lake, which was where she had been spending her evenings while she figured out what came next. She told Leland what Fournier had said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Your mother's journal will be part of the record now." Cecily looked out the window at the lake, which had gone gray and flat in the way it goes before the ice comes. "She wrote in it every week," she said. "For 6 years, she never told me. She just kept going." "She was making sure it existed," Leland said. "She believed it would matter to someone eventually." Cecily turned from the window. "It mattered," she said. She looked at him the way she had looked at him that first morning in the cabin, when he had asked her to tell him what happened, and she had said that no one had ever asked her that before, and meant it plainly. There was still caution in her eyes, the kind of caution that does not leave quickly, that has been too well earned. But underneath it, quietly, something else. "Come back to Crooked Lake," he said. "Not to hide. Not because there's nowhere else, because it's where you want to be." Cecily looked at him for a long time. "I need to go to Thunder Bay first," she said. "There are things I left there, my life." "I know," he said. "I'll be here." She nodded. At the door she stopped and turned back once. "Leland," she said. He looked up. "Patricia was right about you," she said. "Even without meeting you." He did not say anything. She smiled, briefly, and then she was gone, down the porch steps and across the yard, and he watched her taillights disappear down the dirt road toward the highway. The lake was quiet. The birches were bare. Somewhere under the porch the cold was already moving into the ground. He put another log on the fire and sat down, and for the first time in 2 years, the silence in the cabin did not feel like an absence. It felt like a room waiting to be filled again, slowly, on its own terms, by people who meant what they said.